She loved everything about him: his dark skin, his taller height, his white, bright teeth that smiled 1,000 words. She loved everything about him until his tender lips twisted her truth into lies, and his large, laboring hands balled into fists, and his height hovered over her and caused her to be afraid of his next move. She loved everything about him until long sleeves covered her bruises, and her friends noted a change in her mood, and coworkers gossiped, not knowing the full story, and relatives cried with her for comfort and in prayer. She loved everything about him until the cops were called again and again and again, and charges were filled but never followed through, and lies were told to her again and again and again. Till one day the God of her past and present, who she believed would keep his angels posted in the gaps before and after her mistakes, woke her up, and she gathered her wits, wisdom, and low self-esteem and made the choice to leave. Perhaps one day she will cease to remember how she loved everything about him except his hurt, and now lives in solitude and with peace, only because in her stillness she heard God and left.
Okay, so first question, was being an author one of your childhood dreams, or was it something that happened later in life?
It was actually a childhood dream, because I actually started writing books in the 3rd grade, and I used to give them to my teacher. And, she said to me, Audrey, this is so great. You're so creative. And my grandmother, I used to do a lot of stories based on my grandmother. And my grandmother would buy a lot of wigs. So one of the books I gave her was called Hester's New Wig, how my grandmother won this wig in some kind of contest. I don't really remember if that was a fact, but that's how I wrote the story. And I had little pictures and stuff. And she just looked at it and she smiled and she says, I said, I want you to keep it. She says, no, I want you to take it. I said, no, I want you to keep it because it's one of my favorites. And she said, I believe one day that you're going to be a great author. And I said, thank you. And I just thought it was just fun to write stories about what was happening in my childhood at that time. So it was kind of like from childhood.
When did you first get into the idea that you are actually going to be an author?
Um, I always wanted to be an author, like I said, but what happened is during the middle of my life, I started writing this book, the first one, The Flip Side of Me. And I used to take all the poems to work every day, and I had like a serious international team of women who supported me, and we would meet in my big office, in the school, and lunch break, we'd have lunch together. And I said, let me read this poem to you. And I kept writing these poems, and the genre of those poems are erotic, but decent and in order. And they told me, you got to put this in a book. You got to put this in a book. And I was like, I don't know if I could do that because, I don't want people looking at me like I'm some kind of a weirdo. And it was like, no, Audrey, you need to tell the story because I wrote it from the perspective of being, I'm married, and I wrote it from the perspective of a married woman speaking as decades passed, so it's written in 4 parts. And finally, due to their urging, put it in a book. And then I was like, should I really publish this? Should I really publish this? Oh, I don't know. But God truly spoke to me and said, guess what? I got somebody in Philadelphia who's doing the same thing, and she's good too, because I created her. So either you do it or I'll get the girl in Philly. And I said, okay. So that's why I used the pen name. It's under Audrey Bassett. And I haven't been disappointed. This book has been selling on Barnes & Nobles for 14 years. So that's a blessing.
So what was your publishing process like for the first book? And And how did you discover what you needed to do to get it published?
Well, I did go to, I took quite a few classes at that time. The last class I took was a free 3-day seminar at the, downtown Brooklyn. And what kind of impressed me and then kind of threw me off was the person who was in charge of it said, matter of fact, this book was already out in a self-publishing company, xlibris.com. I went through them. That's how I got that first book published. Oh yes, I went through xlibris.com, which at the time was the top 3 of the self-publishing venues. That's how I got started. But I didn't use them again. But it was a good experience because you learned a lot about how the books, how it's distributed throughout the other venues, Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, like I said, it was a good experience. Yeah.
What was something you've learned during your experience about publishing?
I learned that, and I've taken so many courses, like I said, I've actually, went to live classes at the time. I learned that, you can really do this yourself. It's really a process. You just have to be focused. You got to stay focused. I took a bit from each class that I ever took. And like I said, all these classes were in person. Like I said, I started out saying that I took the class at the Marriott, which was, that was a real, I took a booklet with me, a journal with me, and I kid you not, half of that journal really was with bits and pieces. I've also taken some other classes online, more recently, like in 2020, during the pandemic, with representatives who said, "Oh, I can help you get your book out." And so you take bits and pieces of everything that you learned. I learned about how to you can have people purchase the book before it's actually done. How you get to maneuver, do the what you call it, ebooks. That's another thing that I'm working on for my upcoming books. Things like that. You take bits and pieces of everything. It's very valuable. I do suggest anyone that is trying to put a book out that you do take the time to listen to the experts, so to speak, the people that have done this before, because you definitely, even if you don't feed into their program, which now of course everything costs. When I took the class at the Marriott, it was free a whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it was phenomenal. But at the end, the course that they wanted you to put in, to help you, either help you they'll do the book for you, help you do the book, or you can self-up. It was the amounts were outrageous. So, that's when I learned the best. Like, I can do this myself,
So you've already told us the first book is about, I guess you can say, a wife talking, poems written by, you can say, a wife talking about generations of her marriage with her husband.
Right.
This next book, Brown Girl Bedside, is there a theme, or are these just poems from all different themes?
No. Brown Girl Bedside Poet is me speaking, I guess you could say, in an urban language. They're much more, some poems were new, but I was able, because of the way I write, I was able to dig back into my files. And I found poems that I wrote for, let's say, a generation of Black boys. And I find it very relevant to 2020. That book was published in 2020. The poem I wrote was like in maybe 2000. I mean, so I was like, wow, again, insight, listening to my inside voice, like, you don't have to write everything new, Audrey, because you've been doing this since you was 11. I'll tell you that story in a minute. So go into your files, and I did. It for the most part, those poems are new and was written like in 2019, maybe 2018. But really, there are at least at least a minimum of 6, 7 poems that were written back before either 2000 or prior, but they're still relevant, you know. And growing up in Bedside, that was the whole theme. Like I just came upon that title. We're trying to do some creative, because I do all my book covers. I was trying to do something creative, and I started working with the pen, and where it was coming, I was like, I kind of like this. So that's how that happened.
Awesome. So any advice you would give to an because as you said, you started when you were young, and thankfully you had someone who inspired you and encouraged you to keep going. Any words
Yes.
of encouragement to a poet out there who may not have had that encouraging word on how to go forth in poetry?
Well, I'm again, being young, I was given my first journal in 5th grade by one of the school aides, Miss Cook. Um, I She encouraged me to write in a journal because I was being bullied a lot. People who know me say, Audrey, you bullied. That's not who it would seem. If you know me, not that girl, that woman, she can't be bullied. Yes, I was bullied a lot because I was very quiet. I had a brother a twin brother, God bless him. He, we both were artistic, but he was the one that kind of like was more people person. Me, I was kind of like, kind of stayed to myself. So she gave me this journal in 5th grade as a graduation present when I was going to the 6th grade, and she says, "You write down your thoughts, and don't never let anyone think they better than you." She used to always tell me that, and I kind of stuck with that. So that's when I started journaling, and that journaling is what saved my life, as so to speak, because even I was raised very well by our grandparents. May they also rest in peace. But my thing was just put it on paper, write it out. And basically in all my journals, even from a young girl, I used to always start with "Dear God," because that was instilled in me that God was, the end all, and he still is. Yes, he is. And so that's how everything I've got through life changes and college and childbirth and marriages and everything is "Dear God." So that was my whole premises, to write down. That's my word to anybody, that young person, old person, in between age. If you want to express yourself, write down your thoughts. You could start by journaling, but write it and let it, own your truth. Know who you are. A lot of, one of the best poems I ever wrote, to me, and back in the day, in the 70s, was I was in college, John Jay College, and the professor, I was working 2 jobs, but I was an independent student. So I had to pay my own rent, buy food and things, but I was working 2 jobs night and day, and I would get to class late all the time. So I couldn't meet with the group. It was a Black Studies class, and I couldn't meet with my counterparts because my work schedule, like right after, before school, I worked a job 9 to 6. Then I'd be to school by like 7:38. Then after that, I had to go to another job. So it was very difficult. I met with them a couple of times, but not enough. The professor told me, I got to the class late that day for our presentation. And as I went to, my group was up, and he said, when I went to say one poem, say something, he said, they talked about that. And I forgot, I said, okay, it was on relationships or something. And I said, I talked about something. He said, your other partner talked about that. So I said, okay, I got a poem I'm going to read. And he looked and folded his hand. He says, better be a hell of a poem, Miss Brockington. And needless to say, I think I called it like Audrey's Theme 101 or something like that. And it was just talking about relationships and how I didn't want to get involved with, in a relationship like most people at my age, 19, 20 would do. And I didn't want to have premarital sex, all of that. And the bottom line is that when I finished that poem, the class was silent, but then the teacher just started clapping, and everybody just clapped. And he said, he looked at me. They was like going, "Oh shoot, did you hear what she just said?" And he said, Miss Brockington, you just passed my course. I want to see you after class." And that right there to me was, because it was just something I had written out, and I showed it to a girlfriend. She said, "This is really nice." And I'm going, "You think that's a poem?" She said, "Yeah," because I was used to poetry rhyming, and it wasn't a poem that rhymed at every stanza and stuff like that, but it was deep. Okay, and that's was what capped it for me. Like, I can do this, So, yeah,
Thank you for sharing
yeah,
that.
right. Welcome.
So, if you had a chance to meet a poet that you inspired you or you admire, whether they be dead or alive, who would this poet be and why?
Well, I did have the experience of meeting Nikki Giovanni. I actually was in a show with her from my church when I was young. It was a program, and she was our guest speaker, so I did get to meet her up front. And she said to me something like, "This is good. You have to keep going. You gotta keep pushing forward. You'll get there. You'll get there." I admired. Oh my God, I love Nikki Giovanni. And then I had the experience. Audrey Lorde was one of my college professors. Um, Ironically, we didn't see eye to eye because I was in a different kind of state of mind. I did not understand her poetry at that time. It was very abstract to me. Um, but what linked us again was that she had us do this assignment. Like, you're in a cave and there's nobody around you and you're not sure if you're going to survive. So what's the word you're going to write on the wall? And she played this music. And whereas she wasn't really recognizing me in the sense, like, if I raised my hand, she wasn't calling me, which I didn't raise my hand often. A lot of time, again, it was me getting late to class, like 5 minutes, because I was coming from work. It's 7:30 in the morning. I'm trying to keep my eyes open and look at the thing. And she didn't know any of that about me. And she gave me a grade that I thought you had to write a series of poems. I wrote, I don't know, I think you had to write 5 or 6 poems. And she gave me a grade that I thought, are you kidding me? So I approached her and said, after, "I want to speak to her after class." She said, "Not a problem." I think she was waiting for me to have this one-on-one. And she said to me, "So what did you want to talk about?" I said, "Did you read any of my poetry? My poetry is good." And she says, "What makes you think it's so good?" I said, "Because I wrote it." So then she started saying to me, "Well, you get to class late. You don't participate much. You may have a voice, but convince me why I should change your grade." And I said, "Let me read you this poem." And I sat there and read 2 poems to her. And afterwards, she says, "I'm going to change your grade." She said, "But let me explain something to you. You have to be an active participant." And that's when I told her, began to tell her, like, my life, my story. I'm 20 years old. I have to work. I have to work. I have 2 jobs. I live by an apartment by myself. I'm not outside entertaining, and it set a different cap on the relationship for us. So if I could have met someone else, it would have been Gwendolyn Brooks, because I started reading her at a very young age. My grandfather introduced me to her through some encyclopedias that we had. She was in some books, and I was like, "Oh, I like that." And because her name is Gwendolyn, that is, I don't know if I should say this because I'm not fond of that name, but that is my middle name. I kind of connected with her. So if I could have met anybody in real time, it would have been Gwendolyn Brooks. But I did have the good experience to, like I said, Audrey Lorde was my professor. May she rest in peace. And Nikki Giovanni, who has just always been phenomenal to me. With my eyes closed, he is my Denzel. While he breathes his breath on my back, I am his Lola. And whatever Lola wants, well, I remember once when we did it once in the back of his Chrysler Lincoln coupe. A patrolman walking his beat spied us in rhythm of lust, exposed by the light of the street, then told us to move on, because he was young once, I think. And when the towers fell, causing human emotions to swell, we held each other tighter still, embraced so tight. When the tsunami storm flooded the dawn of night, our passion was for holding on for life, not clinging to possessions. And in the time of Katrina, as part of the world, we saw the reality of a world still biased and yet meaner in this techno season. So we closed our eyes and he became my Denzel, and I from behind his Zola. Though neither of us would tell, as the unnecessary roar of the war in Iraq continues to spill blood and crack, still we have passion, and whatever passion deems, well,